What are the best brokers for investors in Belgium? Which ones are the cheapest? Which ones are the safest? Which ones handle all Belgian taxes? And which ones are the easiest to use? In this episode, we analyze and compare the 12 most used brokers by investors in Belgium so that you can pick the best one. We cover the following brokers: Bolero, Degiro, Keytrade, Saxo, Rebel, Mexem, MeDirect, ING Self-Invest, Lynx, Trade Republic, Box, and Interactive Brokers. Hi, I'm Sebastian Aguilar. I'm the founder of Fire Belgium and index investing educator. Over the past 13 years of investing in the stock market, I've changed brokers several times. And because I have an index investing portfolio of over 1 million euros, it's important for me to pick the best one. I have also helped thousands of investors select their brokers. To do so, I have developed a comprehensive research and comparison framework, which we're going to describe and explain in this episode. For this 2025 version, Toon and I have spent more than 3 months collecting the information, emailing all the brokers, and calling them to fill the gaps. It's a ton of work. And a big thank you to Toon for doing most of the heavy lifting for this 2025 update. I used to keep the result of our work for the participants of the Index Investing online course, but I've decided to make it available to everyone for free so that you can all benefit from our work and our research. I also hope this will help brokers improve the services over time, as they can see what's really important for us long-term investors. If you find this helpful, please subscribe, hit the like button, and share the episode with a friend. They'll thank you later. Of course, highly appreciate any positive reviews you can also leave across all platforms. To get the full value of this episode, make sure to download the full Fire Belgium broker comparison table for free on the Fire Belgium website, firebelgium.com/brokers.
And of course, as we're finalizing the editing of this episode, I realized I forgot to say that brokers do change over time. And so there will be changes that happen after we publish this episode. And we will keep the table updated as much as we can, as well as a bunch of updates on the website. So always check the website for the latest and make sure to check on the brokers' websites as well.
Brokers are an important part of index investing, but it's only one part of the system that you need to set up. You also need to understand taxes, pick the right ETFs, determine your asset allocation, build your personal investment plan, and then figure out all the practical stuff. And at the beginning, it can feel overwhelming. So to help you, I invite you to watch the free workshop on the Fire Belgium website, How to Build Wealth on Autopilot, Evidence-Based Investing Optimized for Belgian Taxes. I've recorded this workshop to make sure that you can start in the right way. Here's what we cover: how to invest to get better results than banks and professional fund managers while doing a fraction of the work and paying 10 times less, proven by 50 years of academic research. How to minimize Belgian investment taxes and optimize returns. How to invest well with 100 euros, because you don't need much to actually get started, in less than 5 minutes a month, because investing well requires actually very little time. And how to get started practically with index investing in Belgium in just a few weeks. I'm sharing my practical roadmap to learn everything you need to know and start investing with confidence. You can watch the workshop on demand at firebelgium.com/investing workshop. All right, best brokers in Belgium for 2025. Let's go. So let's get started right away. First thing first, we are going to discuss about different things today. And in this order, we're going to talk about why our work is important and why it's useful and why it can help a lot of people. 2, we're going to talk about the 4 selection criteria, about how to select and how to analyze brokers and then select the one that matches your needs as an index investor for the long term. We're going to speak about the trends that you have identified in the past couple of years. We're going to look at a summary table of the broker table with some of the key elements that a lot of people are interested in. So we can have an overview discussion first, and then we'll do a deep dive in the full broker comparison table. And then finally, for those of you who are listening to us on YouTube or the podcast, stay till the end, because we're also going to share our top 3 brokers, both me and Toon. Hopefully that helps you also make your choice. And we're going to talk about what we would like to see in the future of brokers. Right, so let's get started. Toon, why is this work important, what we're doing here?
It's important because it gives a good idea for every investor or every Belgian investor to make a good selection of the right broker
Yes.
for the investments.
And the broker is obviously one part of the investment strategy, but it's an important part because a lot of the security aspect is related to the broker. So, and the cost. So obviously this is something that people have to select carefully. Our review and our analysis of brokers is quite different from what most people see out there, because we do not get any compensation from any broker. We are fully 100% independent from any kind of financial service provider anyway, which means we don't have financial interest in pushing one or the other, which is very different from a lot of the people out there, influencers and other professionals even. And we like it this way. So we're not going to take any euro from anyone, so that we can remain independent and be on the side of the investor 100%, always sharing what's most important, what's useful for the investor, for long-term index investors in particular. Now let's talk about the selection criteria. So we've been doing this work for 5 years now, in fact, figuring out which were the best brokers for index investors. And this was already in 2020 during COVID, when I was getting started with this, teaching people how to select the right broker and how to start investing. And so what are the 4 criteria?
So we have 4 main selection criteria, which are security, access, convenience, and costs.
Yeah, and it's important to look at them in this order, right? So first, it's security, because in fact, our money is on those platforms, and we want that to be as safe as possible, because ideally this will become big amounts. And for some of us, including me, your entire livelihood could be tied to these investments, or at least a big part. And so you want basically the safest possible platforms. And that would be the first criteria. And as you've seen, when Toon listed them, cost was the last criteria, because in the way we look at this, cost is really the last criteria and safety is the most important thing. If it's cheap, but then there's some safety or security issues and you might lose some of your money, then it's useless almost. The main thing is security. So we want a broker that's well regulated, that has a custodian account, that has good user identification for accessing the account, and a few other criteria. Then the second criteria is access. Obviously, we want a broker that gives us access to what we want to invest in, and also gives us access to it, because some brokers don't accept certain nationalities or certain residencies. And so we want to make sure that this is working. Of course, it's almost a no-brainer, but it's good to look at it. Then we want convenience to be in place. By convenience, we mean it needs to be a broker that has what we need, so that we use it in the correct way and we invest in the correct way. And again, it seems like it's common sense, but there are some brokers that are so complicated and require so much more work or more research or some complicated thing, that they're almost unusable compared to certain other brokers that are very, very user-friendly. And one big aspect of this is how the broker manages taxes, especially Belgian taxes, because if the broker is not doing it, there's a lot of work to do for the investor himself, and potential, therefore, mistakes, which can be then penalized by heavy penalties. And we don't want people to be on the wrong side of the law, and we don't want people to have to pay penalties. So for us, tax management by the broker is an important criteria, alongside other convenience aspects, and one of which is worth mentioning here. In fact, as index investors, for the long term, and the way we look at it is, it's better if people don't have access to their investment in their pocket, so on their mobile phone. We would rather people invest through their web app or an app on their computers, because then you're not tempted to check the market too often. And so uninstalling the app if you have it already, or making sure you just work with the web or computer app, is usually a better way of managing how often you look at your portfolio, because in fact, we should basically not look at it at all. Anyway, so this is part of convenience, which means we want a web app that's pretty good, or a computer app or software that's good and user-friendly, because we'd rather not use the mobile app, which is, for example, this is one of the brokers, which is mobile only. And so that's a small drawback there. And finally, we have costs. Yes, so costs are important, but they're less important for us long-term index investors than for traders, right? Because traders, basically, they pay this transaction cost on a regular basis. They buy and sell more often than us, small or long-term index investors who basically make 1, 2, or 3 transactions a month, and sometimes 1 transaction every quarter, because we buy and hold and that's it. And something that to keep in mind is that most of these brokers have their transactions and their marketing material aimed at more active investors and traders. And in that case, cost is an extremely important factor, a bigger criteria than for long-term investors. So for us, it's a bit different. That's why it also comes fourth, right? It's not just about minimizing costs. It's also making sure that you use the platform correctly and that it does the things for you correctly. Right. So we covered the 4 selection criteria. We have an entire episode actually on this if you want to dive deeper into this topic. Now, let's talk about the work you've done in the past couple of years, Toon, mostly in the past few months, to make this update. What have you discovered? What trends do you see? What can you tell us?
So indeed, thanks, Sebastien. I make every year the update of the broker table, and it takes indeed a couple of weeks. We ask the brokers a lot of questions, sometimes maybe annoying them a bit, our questions. And then I see during the years that there are 3 main trends, mainly the last year and the year before. 3 main trends that I saw changing or not changing, because some trends are even not changing in the broker landscape. And the 3 trends are, I'm going to quickly sum them up and then detail a bit more. The first one is automatic saving plans, so that you can invest automatically. The second one is tax handling, but then not changing that much in tax handling. And then the transaction costs, or maybe the lowering of the transaction costs even in the last months in this year. So that's also very recent information. So about the automatic savings plans, there are a couple of brokers that allow you to invest automatically, meaning that if you don't have an automatic savings plan, every time you want to invest, you have to log in your broker. Yeah, you first have to transfer the money from your bank account to the broker account, and then you have to log in the broker for, like you said, for example, once a month or once a quarter. And then you create a transaction, your market or limit order at your broker to buy your investments, like ETFs, for example. So that's one-time transaction every month or every quarter. But some brokers have also set up a system where you can invest automatically, meaning that you have to create once an order, a periodic order, and then every month or every quarter or for some brokers even every week, if you like, it's automatically executed and you don't have to log in anymore. And that's a bit, I think, the dream for a passive investor, because then you don't have to do anything anymore, because you first transfer the money from your bank account, which you can automate, and then the broker side is also automated. And before, there were 3 foreign brokers that already had an automatic savings plan, and that is Mexem, Bucks, and Trade Republic. But as from last year, there's also a Belgian broker, Bolero, that also offers an automatic savings plan. So that's the first trend that I saw, and I hope that more and more brokers will also allow the investor to create an automatic savings plan. The second trend is the tax handling, and I don't see anything changing there, or not a lot changing there in the tax handling. And it is an important part of the investing, because taxes can give you a lot of administration if it's not well done, and even penalties. So there are 2 main brokers or 2 main differences. The first one is the Belgian brokers, and that's easy, because if you invest with the Belgian broker, all taxes are automatically handled. So then it's easy. You don't have to do anything. Everything is done by the broker. But there are also foreign brokers, and they don't handle all the taxes. Some handle part of the taxes, like the TOB, so the tax on transactions. But others even don't do that TOB, and you have to do it all yourself. And what is the trend here? That I don't see anything changing in the foreign broker side. I think the last change was from Bucks, that I think even more than 1 year ago, that they start also deducting the TOB. But that's the last change. For the rest, there is no change. So there is still a big difference between the Belgian brokers and the foreign brokers.
Yeah, so this is a bit sad because we know some of those brokers have promised that they would actually handle Belgian taxes at some point for Belgian brokers, and we've been waiting basically for a long time, and they are not doing it, and partly because it's a lot of work to set it up, I guess. And it's an additional cost on their side, which they then have to recover somehow, and maybe they don't have the budget to actually manage this. There's many reasons why it might not be happening. This is basically something we've seen with Trade Republic, no, who have been promising that they would be doing it, and they are not doing it, and it might take longer. So who knows? But it's an important aspect, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And the last trend that I saw, or that we still are seeing in the last months, is the reduction of transaction costs. You can maybe already call it a kind of cost war between the brokers, that they try to decrease, every broker tries to decrease the transaction cost as much as possible. And it already started in 2023 when Bolero launched their ETF playlist. So it's a list of ETFs, so not all ETFs, but only a selected list of ETFs, where they reduced the transaction costs. And even for small amounts, if your order is not that big, for example, 200 euros or 500 euros, for example, then you still pay less transaction costs compared to a larger order, which is interesting for investors that don't buy ETFs for big amounts. So that was the first step. And then in 2024, in April 24, Saxo countered this cost reduction of Bolero with their new tariff sheet. And with Saxo, then you can already buy, and it's not only for ETFs, but also for shares, that you already can buy shares and ETFs as from 2 euros per transaction. And that's for a Belgian broker, very low transaction cost. And then later on, as from this year, in the beginning of the year, Keytrade, which was last year the most expensive broker of our whole broker table, also reduced their costs, also to attract, I think, more passive investors for the Euronext stock exchanges. So, for example, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange and the Paris Stock Exchange. They're still a bit more expensive for the other stock exchanges, but if you buy on for example, on Euronext Amsterdam, then they also decrease their transaction costs, and also for small amounts. So they make also a distinction between small and larger orders. So that's not bad, but it's not finished yet, because there's still a fourth broker that reduced the cost, and that is Rebel. And Rebel created a separate cost sheet for ETF transactions, so also focusing more on the passive investor. And then since a couple of weeks, I think in March of this year, the fifth broker decreased or lowered their transaction costs, and that's MeDirect. And MeDirect is also a Belgian broker, so also doing all the taxes. And it's kind of rock bottom transaction cost of, I think, 0.15% without a minimum. So meaning that, for example, if you have an order of, let's say, 500 euros, you even don't pay €1 transaction cost. So that's, I think, also a big change, because for small orders, MeDirect is it is the cheapest broker, or the cheapest Belgian broker. It was Saxo before, but now MeDirect countered it with their very, very low transaction costs.
Yeah, that's quite impressive. So yeah, there's clearly a trend with cost going downward. I wanted to highlight also something else that happened in the past few years, is that there used to be two brokers that were very cheap that have had to increase their costs. And these are Degiro and Box, right? So Box, I think until 2-3 years ago, they were extremely cheap, and they had to include a new cost of 2.99, well, an annual cost, right, for sort of a custody cost, which is 2.99 per month, so 36 euros per year. And they did that because financially they were probably struggling. And the Giro, so we saw something like this too, right? At some point, cost went up.
Yep, indeed, because they also have a core selection. It's a bit the same like the ETF playlist of Bolero. So also a list of ETFs that you could buy really for free with €0 transaction cost. And then they changed it to, I think it's still €0 transaction cost, but there is a new handling, or a handling fee of €1. So that means that for now you have to pay €1 for each transaction from the core selection of the Giro.
So they still call it zero transaction cost, but it costs €1. Okay.
And it's only for minimum of it's not for all transactions. I think the first transaction of the month, and then still some other conditions if you make more than one transaction.
Mhm.
So it's not all free.
Yeah. So basically what I'm coming at is like we see that the brokers that used to be a bit more expensive are finding ways to reduce their costs, their transaction fees, basically. And brokers that used to be cheap or free almost, they had to increase to a certain level. So I think there's like sort of like they're converging towards a price that seems reasonable for ETF transactions, which is nice.
Yeah.
But also another trend that then is important to highlight here is that costs of transactions change, right? And basically almost every broker will change their transaction cost at one point. So making your investment strategy and the selection of your broker based solely on that is a bad move. And when they change their transaction fees, it doesn't mean you have to change your broker because it could change again the other way around, or another broker could become more interesting. All that to say that basically, yeah, cost is not the main thing to look at. And when cost transaction fees are changing, you don't necessarily have to change your broker. That's the key message here. Okay. So these are important trends, right? Let's look at the summary table. This is something that you had prepared initially for the VFB magazine and the presentation, right? So this is going into the magazine and the presentation, and we basically formatted it to our own style for Belgium. Here we go. So for audio listeners, we're now sharing a summary table. And what we're going to do is we describe it so that even though you're just listening to the audio, you'll get the full value. So Toon, what I suggest is we review each broker independently one by one so that listeners can get this right. And we give, some kind of overview of the whole thing. So what we're going to talk about is each of the brokers. So we have Bolero, Saxo, Keytrade, Rebel, and MeDirect, as well as ING Self-Invest. And these are basically the real Belgian brokers, right? We have 6 of them. Then we're going to speak about Degiro, Lynx, Mexem, and Bucks, which are kind of foreign brokers, kind of Belgian too. But basically, they're mostly foreign and they handle the TOB, but they don't handle all other taxes. And then we're going to talk about Trade Republic and Interactive Brokers, which are not even handling the TOB or tax on transaction, right? And then for each of these brokers, we're going to look at the transaction costs for an ETF order of 2,500 euros on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, because that's where most of the ETFs that we like to invest in are. And we just took this arbitrary number of 2,500 euros, which is something that you can do monthly if you're saving a lot, quarterly if you're saving a little less, and even every 6 months or so if you're saving even less. It's an arbitrary number. If it's 1,000 euro, the numbers will be slightly different. If it's 500 euros, those numbers will be slightly different as well. Then we look at ongoing fees, if there are any. We look at which broker deal with transaction taxes, which we already mentioned, sort of. Withholding tax on dividends, the withholding tax on bond ETF capital gains for accumulating bond ETFs. So that's the render tax. And then which brokers have an automatic investment plan. Right. Toon, you wanna go ahead and start from the first?
Yep. So I go with the first of the list. That's Bolero. They have a transaction cost of €7.5 for each order. Important to note here is that it's for a normal order, so not from the ETF playlist, because ETF playlist can change every time. And first, if you want to invest with an ETF, consult their website for the list of the ETF playlist and in their tariff sheet. They don't have any ongoing fees and they handle all the taxes, meaning that the TOB tax or the transaction tax, the withholding tax on dividends. An important remark here, the dividends that we mention in this table are the dividend check tax, the dividend tax check in this table and also in our broker summary, in our broker table, is the dividend tax for ETFs. That's important because sometimes for individual shares, some brokers even withheld some taxes, but we look into the Belgian dividend tax for ETFs and also the coupons for the bond ETFs. And then the renders tax, so the capital gains on bonds, is also withheld by Bolero, and that's, I think, for the 3 main taxes that are very important for investors. And since last year, they also started with their invest and repeat automatic investment plan. for
Can you
it.
tell us more about this plan? Because it's a bit different from the other ones.
Yeah, indeed. So Bolero created this service, let's call it the service, invest and repeat, where you can create, instead of creating a normal order, you can create a periodic order like they call it, where you select a number of ETFs that you want to buy. For example, I want to buy 10 IWDA, for example, which is a broadly diversified stock ETF, and it's just an example, so no financial advice. And then you say I buy 10 IWDAs, which are, I don't know, about 100 euro, for example, and then they create an order of 1,000 euros. It's a nice system to start, but it has some disadvantages because the value of your ETF, like the IWDA, can change it changes every day and every month. So if you create a periodic order on a monthly basis, today it could be 100 euro for one share, but for example, next month it could be 105 euro or 95 euro, for example. So that's a bit more difficult to plan, but I'm happy that they offer the option because some brokers don't offer that option, but it can be improved.
Yeah, so it's better than nothing, but it could be improved indeed. All right, let's talk about Saxo.
Yeah. So Saxo, like I already said or explained in the trends that I saw, is that they decreased their transaction costs. And the €2 that I was talking about is also for the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. So you only pay €2 for an order, or the minimum of €2 for an order, without ongoing fees. So that's only transaction costs that you pay at Saxo. And they also handle all the taxes. So TOB, so also the dividend and coupons, and also the Reinders tax for bonds. But they don't have an investment plan, no automatic investment plan.
So another quick edit as we are finalizing just before the release of this podcast episode. Saxo Bank has announced an update and the release of their Auto Invest feature, which is basically an automatic investment plan. And with Auto Invest with Saxo Bank, you will be able to open a new account and invest monthly amounts in specific ETFs according to a specific asset allocation that you decide. And so with this new feature, this makes Saxo and Saxo Bank really interesting. So they have very low costs and they now have this automatic investment feature. So I'm doing a quick update of the podcast in a couple of places just before we release it so that at least it's up to date at the moment that we launch. Something to highlight as well related to actually this table and to taxes. One is this table only highlights things related to costs for a specific type of transaction and taxes and investment plans for convenience. We're not looking at security and access. For those things, it's important to go to the full broker comparison table because there we highlight all that, including the weaknesses when there is one in terms of security or access. And the second part is that even though we highlight most of the things related to convenience, we don't talk about the tax on investment accounts above 1 million euros. But an easy rule here of thumb is that most brokers who deal with all other taxes also handle the tax on investment account above 1,000 euros, above €1 million on the bank account, on the investment account. And finally, we are aware that there is a tax on capital gains that is likely to come in the future, and that the brokers that are handling all taxes, they will most likely handle that one as well to a certain level, right? To what's possible. We'll see, right? And certainly those who are not handling any taxes, they will certainly not handle that one either. But again, things might change when this comes up. We will see how brokers are reacting and what kind of service they will offer. But this is important to highlight. Okay.
Yeah, indeed, because we asked them their intention to handle the taxes of capital gains that are possibly coming or maybe for sure coming in Belgium. And indeed, the Belgian brokers confirmed that they have the intention to do it. But yeah, for them, it's also still unknown for the moment, the practical implementation. But they have indeed, they told us that they have the intention to do it, like they do with the other.
Yeah, we'll see if it's even possible, because the moment you have two brokers, all of this becomes really complicated for them. Something else to highlight here related to the management of the taxes. During the research that we've done and the conversation we've had with brokers, we know that brokers who are in Belgium and are taking care of all taxes, those at least that we asked about. So what the question I was asking them is like, if there is a mistake in the tax on transaction, right? And the way it is then calculated and paid to the government, and which they do, would they be responsible? And they said yes. When I asked the same question to some brokers that were outside of Belgium and were adding this service in addition to the rest, managing only the tax on transaction, and I asked them the question, one of them said no, they would not take responsibility for mistakes that they made calculating and paying the tax on transaction, which means that we would probably be then also liable for penalties related to that, maybe, right? I don't know exactly, but that's another fairly important aspect. And as you can see, we tend to lean towards Belgian brokers for several reasons. Obviously, convenience, management of future taxes, better support for Belgian taxes, and certainly the fact that they take ownership and responsibility for doing the best job they can, and for the mistakes they might make, makes them far better than the other ones from that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's carry on. So we talked about Bolero, Saxo. For the next four, because we know they are Belgian brokers, we know they manage all taxes. Let's talk about what else there is to talk about. So let's go with Keytrade.
Yeah, for Keytrade. So Keytrade lowered their transaction cost for the Euronext exchanges. So for also for Amsterdam. So for our transaction cost for the order of €2,500 in Amsterdam, you pay €5.95. And I remember, if I remember well, before it was more than double or more than double the amount. So they did a huge cost decrease for a stock exchange of Amsterdam without ongoing fees. So you only pay transaction costs at Keytrade, and beside all the taxes, so they handle all the taxes but don't have an automatic investment plan. And the next one is Rebel. Rebel, even with their differentiation of ETF transaction costs, you pay €6 for a transaction of €2,500 in Amsterdam without ongoing fees, and also don't have any automatic investment plan. And it's not maybe the new kid on the block, but for passive investors can become MeDirect because they make a huge cost reduction or transaction cost reduction. So when you do a transaction of €2,500, only €3.75. And that's even a bigger amount because when your transaction order amount decreases, the cost decreases too. So it's interesting for investors that don't invest huge amounts or don't invest regularly huge amounts. Even no ongoing fee, but also no automatic investment plan. And then the sixth Belgian broker, which is ING Self-Invest. For the order of €2,500, they charge €8.75, which it's already, I think, for now in this table the highest cost, not only for the highest cost of the Belgian broker, but the highest cost of the whole table. And now it's a very important remark because ING Self-Invest charge an ongoing fee. So even when you don't do any transaction, you still pay an ongoing fee, which is calculated on your whole investment amount. So the total of your investments on your account of 0.29% per year, which is for me a kind of red flag because
it's huge.
Even when you don't do any transactions, you're still paying.
Yeah, so this one is obviously we've included ING Self-Invest from the very beginning as a way to show what kind of brokers we don't want to work with, and mostly because back then they had fairly low transaction fees compared to the others. But the main thing that was not always very clear to people who were looking at them as an option is that there's an ongoing fee of 0.21% per year, which is basically more than doubling the total expense ratio. So the total cost that you have on your entire investment portfolio, because nowadays you can get a total expense ratio for ETFs of easily under 0.2. So with this you go to 0.5 very easily, and that's just way too high. So this broker is from the beginning a broker we don't recommend, certainly, and we don't want to invest with. And basically that anyone who looks at our table don't invest with them. That's kind of the usual outcome. And they're there because they're sort of the broker for one of the big banks that is available in Belgium also. Bolero comes from KBC CBC, Rebel from Belfius, and then ING Self-Invest from ING. And you can see clearly that two of those brokers are real low-cost brokers, and that ING Self-Invest is kind of abusing its fame, I guess, or its name, and is charging a lot of money. Now, maybe they provide additional services that maybe some people need, but that's certainly not what we want. And so, yeah, Anyway, on the actual broker table, they have a lot of red around this area because they're very expensive.
Yeah, but they handle all the taxes, but
Yeah.
even don't have any automatic investment plan.
Yes, I think in future versions of this table, we can probably remove them because we're adding new brokers that are certainly more interesting.
So these are the 6 Belgian brokers. So Bolero, Saxo, Keytrade, Rebel, MeDirect, and ING Self-Invest. But we also have 6 foreign brokers, which we are going to start now.
Yeah.
So the first one is the Degiro. The Degiro has and had the name of the very low cost offer. And as already explained, they have a core selection with a list of ETFs where you can invest not free anymore, but with €1 handling cost. And otherwise, you pay €2 plus €1 handling cost, so still €3, which is not that expensive, but it's more expensive than before, so they increased their cost a bit. No ongoing fee. And for taxes, now it's important to make the distinction because they only withhold the TOB, so the tax on the stock exchange transactions. So they don't withhold the tax on dividends and coupons for ETFs, and also not the Reinders tax. So for taxes, this is already, it's not the worst for taxes, but they only withhold the TOB tax and don't have any investment plan. The next one is Lynx. Lynx was a low cost offer before all the others start decreasing their costs, because Lynx didn't change their transaction cost. So that means that you pay €6 for a transaction of €2,500 in Amsterdam. And as I see the table now, it's also one of the higher ones in the table. And they don't have any ongoing fees, so you only pay transaction cost for transactions you do. Lynx also withheld the TOB tax, but not the other ones, so not dividend coupons and Reinders tax, and don't have any investment or automatic investment plan for ETFs. Automatic investment plan is a service that Mexem has. So Mexem is the next one in the list. So that they are low cost. €1.50 is not that much for a transaction of €2,500. No ongoing fees. And they also withhold the TOB tax, not the dividend coupons and the Reinders tax, but the TOB tax. And they have an automatic investment plan. And this plan is easier to use because you can configure an amount that you want to invest, and you can select an ETF that you want to invest in, and then Mexem will automatically, periodically and automatically invest for that amount that you configured. So that's easier compared to Bolero. It's also the same system for automatic investment plans as Bucks uses. So Bucks is the next one. For Bucks, they have 0 orders and they have normal orders. And a 0 order is an order like it's named, for €0. So it's an order with no transaction costs, but it's not immediately executed. So the order is, I think, executed at the end of the day. So they combine a lot of orders of customers and then they send it to, it could be the standard stock exchange or maybe another stock exchange that they have a close collaboration with. But it's a 0 order, but not immediately executed. Disadvantage is that you don't know for sure which price you will pay, because the price at the end of the day could be different from the price at the moment that you configure the order. But for long-term investor, it's not that important, but it's an important remark to make. So Bucks 0 orders are 1.99 if you don't use the 0 order option. But, and that's also one important remark for Bucks, the ongoing fee. So it's not a percentage like ING Self-Invest, but you pay €2.99 per month. If you don't have if you have a small portfolio, it could drag. It's a kind of fee drag on your portfolio. If the portfolio becomes larger, then the fee is maybe a bit less important, but important to know. And Bucks also is withholding the TOB tax, but not the dividend coupons and the Reinders tax. But they also have an automatic investment plan where you can configure an amount and select an ETF to invest in. So it's also interesting. Bucks is also mobile only, so only on mobile.
Yeah, so this is the example of broker that's mobile only, that doesn't have a computer web app.
Yeah, indeed. The next one is Trade Republic, also very cheap. You pay €1 for an order of 2,500 euros and no ongoing fees. But now Trade Republic and also the next one, Interactive Brokers, don't handle any taxes. So even not the tax on transaction. And then you have to calculate the tax on transaction. You have to know which rate to be used. You have to fill in a document, or you have to declare it and even pay it yourself to the Belgian government. So that's, for me, a lot of, my opinion is that it's a lot of administration.
Yeah, and in fact, I can speak from experience here because it's something that I have to do with the broker I'm using, and it's a heavy, like it's an additional admin task that you have to do on top of everything else, and it's not fun to do, and in fact sometimes I forget, and then it's annoying because I have to do it later. And there are probably ways where if you're, if you have good discipline, you can make it just an automatic part of the process of doing the investment and making sure you're doing the math correctly the first time and really checking in 10 different ways that it's correct, because also you don't want to make mistakes here. Long term, if you make mistakes, there can be heavy penalties. And in fact, the main issue isn't so much, like doing the work of actually calculating, declaring, and paying is one part. The main issue with these brokers that don't handle the tax and transaction for investors is that many investors have those brokers and don't even declare and pay and calculate this tax, of course, because they have the sense that maybe the broker is doing it, or they barely understand that they're supposed to do it. And so this is, I think, a major vulnerability on the broker side, and it's full responsibility and impact on the investor side. And I think that's wrong, because I have seen many investors coming to me and saying, Sebastian, I didn't know about this TOB. I moved into Belgium on this date and I've been investing for so long. And if I calculate, this is how much I would have to pay in fines and fees. And it's huge. And in some cases it was bigger, way bigger than the total portfolio they had invested. So yeah, I would certainly avoid brokers that don't handle tax for you, unless you're like fully aware of everything and you've looked at the whole thing and you're simply, you've optimized it and you have a system for it. I would certainly not recommend it to anyone that's not fully informed and that is willing to do all of this work on their own. So certainly never to beginners.
Yeah. So Trade Republic don't handle any taxes, but they have an automatic investment plan, which is quite easy to use and easy to implement. But indeed, very important remark regarding the taxes. And then the last one in the list, that's one that we added this year. We got some requests from investors to add interactive brokers. So we also researched and asked interactive brokers some questions. So the transaction cost for interactive brokers is €3, so not that huge, and no ongoing fees, but also not handling any taxes. So also the same as Trade Republic. So you have to do the whole tax administration yourself, and they don't have any automatic investment plan. These are the 12 brokers, Sebastian, that we researched.
Yeah, so obviously this is a high-level view. What people should understand is that we've covered only very small parts of the full beast here. I'm going to share now my screen, which includes the full broker table, the full broker comparison table. For the audio listener, I highly recommend you go to the website and download the full broker table, because we basically have, it's a huge file with all the information on the 4 selection criteria for all 12 brokers. And for each selection criteria, there's 4 to 5, up to 10 lines of information that's important. So I don't think we should go through everything here, right? Because we covered all the brokers more or less, but we need to highlight what's really important. So I'm going to zoom in here and describe what we are zooming in for audio listeners. So in the security aspect, we look at whether the funds are held in a custodian account. So if there's proper segregation of funds between what belongs to the broker and what belongs to the investor. And just be reassured, everyone, all the brokers that we are covering here have full segregation. Some for whom it's very, very 100% clear, no problem. Some for whom there's like, how come there's this connection between the broker and the custodian? But basically in all cases, they have to follow the law, which requests a certain level of segregation and hence those custodian accounts. And so they're all extremely safe from that perspective. There's basically full protection against broker bankruptcy. And in addition to that, most of those brokers have a certain guarantee, a state guarantee on financial instrument, which can change from one broker to the next, depending on the country they're in and the country they're in fact. We also list which regulator is regulating the broker, because to us it's quite important. We want a Western regulator from a more mature financial system in the country. So certainly it's not something from some strange islands in the Pacific or something. Most brokers are regulated by Western regulators. And I think apart from Mexem, which is regulated in Cyprus mainly, and the other ones are all sort of Western, fully Western, no problem. Then we also look at account security, whether there is a two-step or two-factor system, which is our preferred way of having our investment account secured. We need the highest level of protection so that people can't just log in with the login and password. And unfortunately, there are several brokers, especially on the foreign side of like non-Belgian brokers, that still have only login and password or very simple SMS type confirmation, at least as default. In all cases, we highly recommend for all investors that you set up the highest possible level of account security. Make sure to check all the options with the broker you're working with. SMS, so getting an SMS to your phone and having that as a confirmation is better than just login and password, but it's in most cases like it's the weakest of the better versions. So what we want is a full two-factor or two-step or two-factor system, ideally with an encrypted app or something like that on your phone that fully verifies your identity beyond just an SMS. Why beyond an SMS? Because SMS can be captured, basically, right? Other people can get the information when SMS is sent. And then we also talk about security lending as one of the things that we believe is important from a safety perspective. Most brokers don't do security lending by default, and you would have to opt in to get it. Some brokers have security lending by default, and then you can opt out. That's the case for Bucks. And then one currently has a system where it's security lending by default and you cannot opt out, and that is Degiro. And the reason we've included this in the security aspect of things, it's because by actually reading through the terms and conditions of Degiro, in fact, a couple of years ago already, this has been very clear. When securities are being lent, they're then not held in the custodian account. And so we are not certain of the full security of that. There's an additional risk, of course, in doing so. But the main issue we have with this, and specifically Degiro, is that they don't allow people to opt out. And in fact, we would rather not even be the default that it's in, that it should only be an opt-in type approach. They don't necessarily share the revenue or the returns generated by this activity. They just keep it as their own income. And then, we have this additional question of whether we actually need to take that kind of risk. As index investors, in fact, if we want to generate a bit more revenue or have a bit higher performance, all we want is to simply manage our asset allocation in the right way, right? We shouldn't be trying to get an extra euro or an extra tiny fraction of a percent from things like security lending. This is certainly helpful on the broker side of things because it allows them to make more money and maybe reduce their fees on our side. Who knows if they even do that? But certainly, if it's not a level of risk that we understand as well as simply having slightly higher allocation to stocks, right? So that's something that's quite important. So that's for security. For access, I'm not going to go through everything because basically most brokers give access to everything we need, apart from a couple, which you can see in the table. Convenience, we talked about most of what's important in terms of convenience already in the summary table. Costs, in the summary table, we spoke about one type of transaction on one broker account, stock exchange. In the table, provide full breakdown of all costs and how they're calculated across 4 stock exchanges, so Amsterdam, Paris, Frankfurt, and Milan, because that's where most of the ETFs, in fact, all ETFs we want, they're on those 4 brokers, 4 stock exchanges. So you have here the full comparison, and you can do, your own review of the details of how things are working. And of course, we invite you, especially for cost, to always go check into the tariff sheets of the broker, because this can change, right? So the moment you have it, it could be that the next day the tariff sheet is different. It could be that by the time we publish this, one of those brokers will have changed something. But this will be, this will be good for a while, at least for most of them, but certainly double check, right? And we try to keep it up to date, but still check. And then we do a calculation of cost estimate, transaction of an ETF in Amsterdam or Paris, 250 euros per month. What is the total cost of that type of transaction each year? So if you're an investor who wants to invest 250 euros each month in one ETF, then this is the calculation we're doing for you, is like how much it then costs you total over 1 year. And we do this calculation for Amsterdam or Paris, which are usually the same price, and then for Frankfurt and Milan, which are usually the same price in each of the brokers. And then we do another scenario, which is 2,500 euros per quarter. So it's a higher amount, but we invest only 4 times a year. And this is because some people prefer investing small amounts monthly. Some people prefer gathering more money over time and invest only once a quarter, a bigger amount. And usually that leads to lower transaction costs overall per year, because you do fewer transactions of a higher amount, right? Anyway, so your situation will be different, but at least here you have 2 example scenarios that are important. And you will see that we've included a lot of different variations here. And in some cases, it excludes ongoing fees, because those are either fixed or percentage based of the portfolio, right? Which we then cannot know. And then there's a section lower, which includes a ton of other information in the table. So we have the contact details of each of the brokers, which in most cases work, because that's how we got the information for broker table. We also have a section called responsiveness during broker research. So we've been in contact with all these brokers already for many years, and we see how they respond to us, to our simple requests for information. In many cases, we even contact them as clients, and we see what kind of response there is. In some cases, we're not clients, but we still hope that they would, be open about certain things and responsive. And so we give you an idea of what is the responsiveness level, because when you have an issue, you should go straight to them first instead of asking us, right? They will most likely have the answer. But the problem is that sometimes they're not very good at responding for various reasons. We just share with you here what is our current, that's the current responsiveness level, because this can also change over time a little bit. We add an additional section on type of accounts, so you can see which type of account is available for you: individual, joint, company account, kids account, and which brokers have each of those. So you will also be able to see this in the table. For the security part, we go deeper. We look at what are the custodians for each of those brokers. So where is the money kept, right? Your investments, where is it kept? And what is their rating in terms of credit rating, so in terms of their security level, credit worthiness, so that you get a sense of which ones have the best custodians, basically. In most cases, these are highly safe, but at least you have the information here. For some of these brokers, the information is just not available, and even asking them, we barely get anything. And so it's not always easy to find, but we've put everything we could find. And then something else that we have looked at is what other kind of income the brokers are getting related to the investments that we're making with them. One of them is security lending, which we discussed earlier in security. But we want to highlight 2 other ways that brokers can make money from our investments. One is the payment for order flow, where the transactions are basically routed through a specific stock exchange, I believe, or through another financial institution, which basically wants to have the flow of our orders going through them. And sometimes it's just the information, sometimes, there's a bunch of details there, but basically there's only one who's doing that at the moment that we know of, right?
Yeah.
And some didn't really respond clearly, but we couldn't find information. But basically, Trade Republic is getting kickbacks from Hamburg Stock Exchange, and basically flowing all the transactions through the Hamburg Stock Exchange, so not through the traditional stock exchanges that all the other brokers are using. This is a very specific deal that Trade Republic has with Hamburg Stock Exchange, which, basically it looks like it allows them to have lower transaction costs for everyone, which is obviously how they message this. It also creates some level of, lower trust in the whole system. I'm not really sure what that means. It's difficult to explain, and we're not experts on this, but it certainly is a question. And it's also something that's getting banned by the EU. So they're allowed to do this until June 2026. And we asked them what was their plan for after that, and we haven't had a response yet, but it will have to stop. And then there's kickback from product providers. So in our case, since we invest in ETFs, we asked the question, are they getting money back from the ETF issuers, so the ETF management companies, when we invest through them? For most of those, it's no. Some of these brokers, they do get kickbacks from providers, but not from ETF providers, so it doesn't apply to our scenario. And then again, for Trade Republic, yes, they get a kickback from ETF issuers. So Trade Republic has financial arrangements with ETF fund management companies, and when investors buy their ETFs through Trade Republic gets something in return. Now, of course, they will say it doesn't impact them and they will still offer everything they can. But in reality, I don't know, in fact, if they offer all the ETFs that are available that we need everywhere. But I know that for a while it didn't have Vanguard ETFs, and that's because it didn't have this agreement. Now, I don't know what's the status now, but that was certainly the state 2 years ago. But basically, this introduces another little question of, aren't they biased, and wouldn't they be then more interested in pushing some products rather than others? They certainly make money from the product providers and not only from their own clients. So are they really 100% on the side of the client is a question. Trade Republic has a lot of good things going for them. Not all is good, but certainly they are disrupting the space, and they're doing great work in many directions. These are just question marks, right? So things to consider and be aware of when and if engaging with them. Certainly they don't deal with the tax on transaction for Belgian investors, so they're certainly not on the highly recommended list anyway, but they're there for maybe some other reasons. And then finally, we have costs. Another cost calculation in here, we wanted to see what would be the transaction cost for making a very big transaction of 200,000 euros. And this is for investors who might be moving large sums from other brokers or other funds or big savings into one of those brokers. And basically the cheapest brokers for small transactions is not always the same as the cheapest broker for big transactions. So that's why we included this here. So if you're making a transaction that is a big amount, then come and have a look at this calculation here, because then you get a sense of which of these brokers will allow you to make this big transfer more cheaply. So just another criteria for a specific case scenario. The table also includes a bunch of information about FIRE Belgium, where you can find the index investing workshop, which is available for free on our website, and where you can learn how to invest. Basically, we share the entire framework and we explain how it works and how you can start and how we can help you with the full program that we have as well. There's the FIRE Belgium show, the video podcast that you're currently watching or listening to. You can also then here book a one-on-one consultation with either me, Toon, or one of our other coaches. Certainly, if you want to discuss about brokers, how to pick the best, how to open it, if you're struggling with anything in terms of transactions or any of these things, you can always book a call with Toon. He's our in-house broker expert, and he's becoming an expert at the Belgian level because he's sharing his knowledge with different communities, magazine, newspapers, and all that. And so that's very useful. And then here you have a few other links and our socials here if you want to find us online. Certainly join us on Facebook. We have online communities on Facebook in English, Dutch, and French, and a meetup group if you're not using Facebook. And finally, please connect with us on LinkedIn and other social media. Both Toon and I are fairly active on LinkedIn. We share a lot of stuff there. So we'd love if you connect with us. So that's the full broker comparison table. I highly recommend you download it. It's on the website, and the URL is firebelgium.com/brokers, right? And there you get straight to the full broker comparison table. We have a small summary up here, and then you have access to the table here, and you can download the full comparison table and receive it in your inbox. So even if you're doing this on your mobile or anywhere, just put your email in there, get the full table, then look at it anytime later. We also include the link in the description of this podcast episode, both to this table and to this blog post. The blog post also includes, obviously, the episode, but also a summary of each of the brokers, their pros and cons, and the different aspects that we also invite you to look at, because it will give you a good summary of what's going on here. We've talked about a lot of things here for the past hour, and so this will serve as a nice summary for you. Right. So that's, with this, we're reaching almost the end of our episodes and our review of broker. But certainly, Toon, there's at least a couple more things we need to do. One is we're going to speak about our top 3 brokers. Well, first of all, I would like to ask you, Toon, is there anything here that you feel I've skipped and that maybe we should highlight to make sure we've covered for?
No, I think we are
listeners?
very very complete for selection criteria, the trends, the full broker table, a summary and a full broker table, which you can download if you want to see all the details and make your own comparison and select your broker. So yes.
Okay, then we can talk about our favorite brokers. Toon, what's your feeling on the broker landscape, and what are your favorite ones right now?
For now and also in the past, it doesn't change for me. I'm very favored for Belgian brokers for one big reason, that they handle all the taxes, not only the stock ETFs, but also the taxes on bond ETFs. Sometimes forgotten, if you have a bond ETF, there are different taxes. And if the TOB is handled, that's nice. But if you have, for example, capital gains tax, if you rebalance your portfolio, or if you need to sell or want to sell a bond ETF, that can be a kind of difficult transaction, or difficult to calculate and to declare and to pay that tax. So I'm in favor of Belgian brokers.
Okay, but top three.
My top 3, number 1, Bolero. I think it was also the same last time, but Bolero has a nice, it's a big bank behind, KBC in Belgium. They have a nice platform, not only the app, but also the web browser version. And not that important, but it's not unimportant too, that they created their ETF playlist, so they have lower cost for some ETFs. So that's my number 1. My number 2, I'm now going to Keytrade, because Keytrade has a decent platform. Maybe you can say it's a kind of basic platform, but the easier the better. So not that much red and green lights and flashing up, and no flashy platform, but decent platform, easy to use. And also, as from now, also as from this year, they decreased their transaction cost, which is a kind of bonus for a passive investor. So on my second place is Keytrade. And the third one, I still go to Saxo now, because Saxo, also for the same reason, taxes are handled, and easy to use platform, and also not that high transaction cost.
Okay, so another quick update with the change in Saxo Bank. I had a quick check with Toon, and he does put Saxo and Bolero now both as his equal number 1 in terms of his favorite brokers. I'm surprised he didn't include MeDirect in this one.
Yeah, MeDirect is let's call it in my top 3, a bonus one, so the fourth one. If I would choose between all the others, before I would take Degiro for the costs and for other reasons, and now I'm doubting to go for the fourth one, to MeDirect. So the best of the others for me. So I have a top 3, and then the best of the others would indeed be MeDirect, because handle all the Belgian taxes and are very cost efficient for the investor. So.
Yeah, so they're basically cheaper than most of the other ones, right? So now if you invest €1,000 with them, it's €1.50. Basically, no one else does that in the Belgian landscape, right?
Yeah, plus
So
taxes, all taxes are handled. That's
yeah,
also.
so cost-wise, they're very low. Okay, so my top 3 is a bit different, I would say. So I do keep Bolero as number 1, just like I had in all the previous versions. Mostly, well, it's not mostly. It's because, well, I've used them, right, in terms of how I test. And they have an excellent customer service. The thing is, I'm tempted to move away because they're not the lowest price. So that's one thing, certainly. But then price is not the key thing, and they might lower the price too much to rest at some point. What maintains though, is that they've included an automatic investment plan. It's not perfect because it's only a number of ETF shares per month or regularly. It's not a fixed amount, and that's kind of annoying because I would like it to be okay. I transfer 500 euros and then 500 euros get invested. That's not the case now. It feels like even though you can automate some things, you still need to go and check that things are going well, and that because of the change of ETF price, then you're not surprised by something, and you maybe have to change how much you transfer each month to match it, or you have to there's something to check basically, which I wish there wasn't. So I'm hoping that they will improve on this, and I think the fact that it exists might already be a good solution for a lot of people, just the way it is. And then for the next one, I think it will be Saxo Bank. Yeah, Saxo. They basically tick all the boxes and they're competitive price wise. I would say maybe Saxo and MeDirect are sort of equal now in the way I look at them. In fact, they're both top three, and I don't really know which order to put them. I haven't used MeDirect, so in fact, I don't have the feeling of their customer service or their app. But I would be curious to see if they're user friendly. It might be a solid option. In fact, maybe at the level of Bolero and Saxo. And then if that's the case, then the fact that they have a lower price might make them number one. In fact, they're quite up there. Another and final quick update, and this is similar to Toon. I have changed the ranking of Saxo Bank in my top three, and to me now, I think they are probably a better platform to start with for most investors who are investing on a regular basis, small to medium amounts. The new auto invest feature is really interesting because it automates. It allows investors to basically set a way of investing and forget it, which I think has a lot of benefits. As you know, we'd rather not look at our investments, but it has some limitations too. For example, it can only buy full ETF shares, right? So there's no fractional shares, which means that if people want to invest in ETFs that have a high price and have only small monthly amounts to contribute, then it's a bit tricky. So there's some situations where it will not be perfect, but I think overall it's a great improvement and something that will help a lot of investors. And so to me, Saxo Bank now becomes number one above the others. And I'm hoping that they are basically leading the change and so that other brokers will follow in offering similar features of automatic investment plan. All right. So what would you like to see in the future, Ton? I guess we have the same things, but let's wrap up with that.
Yeah, it was already one of my three trends in the broker landscape of the last year and last years, but I want to see more improvements in the automatic investment strategy of the brokers. For now, we have 4 brokers which have that option to create an automatic investment plan, and I would like to see more brokers offering this service.
Yeah, and hopefully Bolero moves to a service where it's a fixed amount as well. Obviously, we know that there are limitations of what's possible, depending on whether or not they offer fractional shares, which is also quite complex. But hopefully, other brokers can follow suit. So certainly, what we want generally is like higher security, more convenience, lower costs, because access is usually quite okay. So on the security side, what we want is really account security to max. Be careful with security lending, especially with brokers like Degiro. On the convenience side, automated, but also trying to get all taxes managed by the broker. That would be ideal. And then on the cost side, we've seen a good trend, and it's likely that it will stabilize around the prices we have now, because we've seen that when they go lower, they actually have to increase the prices somehow, and without saying that they're increasing the prices. So one of them calls it a handling fee, which is a transaction fee, but they don't want to call it that. And the other one added a monthly fee, both trying to not say they're increasing their fees, but they effectively did because they probably went too low. Obviously, there's a lot of ways fees can be spent within and how they work, how efficient they are at actually doing all this internally. And we don't know about how they work internally, right?
But I also think more long term regarding transaction cost and cost in general for my broker selection, if I select a broker for myself, because when you have a small portfolio, total amount of your portfolio which is fairly small, I totally understand that transaction cost can be huge for some investors. But when your portfolio becomes bigger and bigger and the amount and the total amount of your portfolio becomes bigger and bigger, yeah, the weight and the percentage of one transaction cost is fairly small compared to your total portfolio. And for me, that's quite important to also not only look for now, but also long term.
Yeah, there's something about this, right? So for beginner investors with a small portfolio, in individual transaction fees can be important. And as the portfolio grows, then it becomes a smaller part of the total cost because we have ongoing total expense ratios as part of the ETFs. So yes, that's important, certainly. That plus the total, the tax on transaction and other taxes, right? So there's a bunch of other fees that then become more important for larger portfolios. Indeed, yes. Okay, I think, we've covered what we had to cover. Again, everyone, if you want the full picture, download the Fire Belgium broker comparison table, book a call with Toon if you want any kind of help, if you have any questions on how to pick the best broker, how to manage the broker, how to make your transactions, how to register the broker if you pick a broker that's outside of the Belgian ones. Book a call with us if you need help with your investment strategy or with your financial independence plan. We don't give financial advice, but we can guide you in many different ways and share with you best practice and resources to help you move forward on your way. And finally, if you're at the very beginning of your journey, then certainly the best place to start is the free workshop. So that's where I would go if you were just beginning, because opening a brokerage account and then trying to figuring things out on your own will be quite difficult. Even if you know what ETF you want, it's usually not sufficient. There's a lot of work to do to become a full-fledged index investor. And this is something that usually we do over the span of a few weeks. So far, we've done that with more than 500 people, and we keep helping people all the time getting started in the right way with a full personal investment plan. And so that's the best place to start with this, is to go to the free workshop on the Fire Belgium website. Right, Toon, thank you so much for this excellent work. We'll keep updating this for as long as we can every year. And so everyone, feel free to share this episode and this resource with everyone, because we just want the community to benefit from this. We've done a lot of work in the past few years, and Toon has done a lot of work in the past couple of years to update all this. It's tremendous value and everybody should benefit. So that's why it's all here, free for all of you to benefit from. All right, Toon, any last words, any farewell or last piece of wisdom?
We have a very nice resource and a lot of interesting content in the broker table. So I would like to invite all the investors to download the table and to dig in the details if they like.
Yes, and then when they like
These are
it,
my final words.
I invite them to tell you what they like. And if you have any feedback or comment and ways to improve, let us know as well. You can message Toon or email us at hello@firebelgium.com. And we'll try. We take into account the feedback that we get for the future versions. This has been improved every time based on people's feedback. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.